everybody, and welcome once again to the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every week I talk to writers about their work, the publishing industry, and how they do what they do. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms, and you can subscribe to either or to both so you never miss a thing, which of course is what I hope you will do. I always forget to mention too, you can also find me on Facebook under Rich Eisen, the open mic. I always post these interviews when they're done and they're ready to go up onto one of the other sites. You can interact with me a little bit there as long as you behave yourself because I brook zero nonsense on social media, but I'd love to see you there otherwise. So I keep forgetting to tell people about the Facebook page. So there you go. I have now fulfilled that one obligation, and I'm ready to move on to the main event today, which is um, speaking with my guest, who is a prolific novelist and short story writer, and all-around creative guy with fingers in any number of artistic pursuits, including podcasting and noir at the bar and TV and et cetera, et cetera. He's produced scores and scores of short stories and over 2 dozen crime novels, including his brand new one, The Last Few Miles of Road, which we're going to be talking about here in just a moment. He's making his second appearance on the show, and I'm really pleased to have him back. So, Eric Beetner, welcome back to the open mic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back, Rich.
Oh, absolutely. We always have fun conversations about this kind of thing, and I'm looking forward to this one because, uh, I've had a chance to look a little bit at the new book. But for the uninitiated, tell us all about The Last Few Miles of Road.
Well, it's the first of a trilogy, so more adventures to come. But in this one, we meet Carter McCoy, who is a man in his 70s. And it's not a spoiler because literally the first page is he has gotten a terminal diagnosis. So he knows his time on Earth is short. And he decides that in his last remaining moments, he wants to take care of something that he feels like he should have done a long time ago, and that is to kill the man who was responsible for his daughter's death. So I try to have it really be an exploration of somebody who has lived a good life and has been a good person, but takes this sort of left turn into criminality in his last act of life and how he reconciles that with still feeling like he's led a good life and he's not trying to be a career criminal, but he also gets sucked deeper into into that life because once you take a step off the path, I think that's you're destined to keep following that road. So, it's him sort of having a reckoning of he's capable of doing some things that he'd never thought he was, but he can justify them by thinking that it's, in this case of his daughter's killer, balancing the scales and sort of righting a wrong that should have been taken care of by the justice system that wasn't. And like I say, then he gets drawn into some other stuff where he sees, okay, if it's all in the service of helping good people, maybe some folks need to go away.
Well, I like the theme, and we've seen this before, but what I like about Carter McCoy is he does have a conscience. He
Mhm.
doesn't, so often we see, because we've seen the revenge thing in both film and books before, and usually that you just have this angry person who, you know, um, doesn't think about the consequences of what they're doing.
Right.
And, I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that as a story trope. But I think it's far more interesting when we do have those thoughts, when you have that person um, never straying too far away from their humanity. It makes them a much more rounded character. And so that's what I'm finding so far with him. He's a much more rounded character than we often would see in a story like this. So I'm kind of curious, um, how did this storyline develop for you?
I for some reason I'm fascinated with older characters. I feel like excuse me, they don't get portrayed as often as they should. I feel like and there's just something interesting about someone who is in that last chapter and how that changes your perspective. So I thought it was interesting to explore somebody who has had these thoughts that, the man who's responsible, even if slightly indirectly for his daughter's death, never got what he deserved. And now this is his chance to be his own form of justice. It sounds right, and it sounds like that would be satisfying, but yeah, on one level, is that going to scratch that itch? Is that going to set things
Mhm.
right? He doesn't know until you take the steps to do that. And for me, any book that I read, the number one thing I look for is, I try to put myself in the story. That if a book or a character has that "what would I do" kind of hook to it, then I'm all in on a story. So I think it always does start a little bit with me asking myself, well, what would I do? I have two daughters. If something happened to them, I think it's just sort of human instinct to think I have to avenge this, but would I be able to do that? I'm not entirely sure that I would. And if you go down that road, are you abandoning all of your morality and the good life you've led up until then? It's an interesting question that I wanted to explore.
It is an interesting question. And I was referencing it earlier. We think of Charles Bronson in Death Wish or Dirty
Right.
Harry. And I think there's a whole generation of us in our culture that have been brought up with that ethos of, or going back to the John Wayne character of the early part of the 20th century. That there is the justification for revenge,
Right.
right? And again, without any of the consequences. And what I thought of, I saw a documentary. um, I can't remember how, it's been quite a while, and it dealt with prisoners. And I was interested in that at the time because my daughter is a mental health professional and she was working in a jail in the Bay Area, working mostly with female prisoners. And but I saw this documentary that piqued my interest, and they were talking to a guy who he was in for murder, he was in for life, and he had killed his son-in-law because his son-in-law was violent and had been abusing his daughter.
Oh, wow.
And they asked him, what he was in for, and the way he explained it was, he said, "Well, my son-in-law had repeatedly hit my daughter. I asked him to stop. He laughed at me, and 6 shots later, I knew he was never going to do it again." And the
Yeah.
way he was saying it was so calm and so, I don't want to say bloodless. That's not the right choice of words here,
Yeah.
but he had made that decision. He was, based on everything that in that interview, he was fine with the repercussions, which he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. And to him, that was a fair trade-off. But just the way he said it was so um, calm. It was just
Yeah.
there was no rage to it. It was just the most matter-of-fact thing. And so I've had the same thought you have. I mean, clearly I have a daughter, and I don't know what I would do if something happened to her. I mean, I think we're all capable of the best and the worst that humanity can produce, right? We're
Exactly.
all capable of it. It's just, what is the thing that would drive you to that? And is there a point at which you say, I will not trade my humanity anymore for
Right.
whatever this other thing is? It's almost like dessert, right? I
Yeah.
will not subject myself to the scale tomorrow if I eat this thing or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I thought I'm thinking it's a very fascinating, different take on this character.
Yeah.
And
I wonder if that's the first time that murder's ever been compared to cake.
we break new ground here on this show all the
Okay.
time. That's what we try to do. Well, the reviews so far that I've seen from just from readers have been fabulous. People are really seeming to like this book, and I'm really happy for you. How are you feeling about how it's being received so far.
Yeah, so far so good. It is nerve-wracking, when you release a new character into the world that you want people to like, especially knowing that there's two more books to come. You want people to to want to go on the journey. But yeah, so far people are really identifying with Carter. And I think there is something that people can relate to, like you say, it's this almost universal notion that of the good and the bad, the dark and the light that we all have that people can relate to. And I think it really is why revenge stories in one form or another are perennial, plots that last throughout the decades or centuries even. But yeah, it's been really gratifying, and now that people get, starting to get deeper into the book, they're also reacting to Chester, his dog, which is really gratifying to me because I think it's the first time I've ever written a dog into a book, which without trying to be pandering and think like, oh, this will appeal to a mass audience, put a cute dog in there, and then, but it's something I think I might have resisted, but it may be a little too long. So I really liked adding this dog into his life, and it's funny to me to see people react to that because it's such a gimme, like, yeah, he's this adorable. He's because he's Carter's a senior citizen. He goes and he purposely goes to the shelter and says, "Give me the oldest dog you have." So he brings home, just a dog who is on his again, it's just like Carter. He's in his last chapter of life, but he gets this sort of renewed vigor, and he finds his great new best friend, and everyone wants to root for the dog who gets a second chance to just go out and run in the yard and chase squirrels and lay around
Sure.
and be lazy and be spoiled.
Absolutely. I understand the hesitation there. I really do. But as somebody who reads as much as I do, I love having a dog in a story. I'm a huge dog person. I think anyone who's seen the show knows I talk about my
Yeah.
dogs a lot. Um, and I've read some great books where the dogs are true sidekicks. It can only go off the rails when you have talking dogs and stuff like that. And
Oh
then
yeah.
that's a whole different thing. But I think it's so natural for somebody to have a companion animal and, especially an older person,
For
to
sure.
have a companion animal. I can't envision my life without a dog. So I think it
Uh-huh.
just makes a character that much more relatable.
Yeah, and it just as like yourself, as a dog lover, like we have two dogs with us now. We have had some foster dogs come in and out that we've taken care of. It's like they make your life so much better. And it was, I mean, from a purely technical sort of writerly standpoint too, Carter spends a lot of his time, especially in the first half of the book, alone. And I wanted him to have a reason to talk to someone, it's a perfectly justifiable thing where he doesn't want to just putter around his house. Now he's a widower now, just talking out loud to himself, and he sort of recognizes that that's maybe a step too far even for his own mental health. So yeah, he's going to have a dog in the house, and then any good dog owner knows you talk to your dog all day long. It's just what we do.
It's absolutely true. Well, my older dog who turns 9, actually, a couple days after we are recording this, she'll be turning 9 years old. So not old, but she's edging toward that. But my
Yeah.
wife has long called her the other woman, so that should tell you where the role she plays in this household, right? How
Yeah.
often how I talk to her, etc. So yeah, I think that's a great thing. I'm curious too, as I noted, you've been pretty prolific with novels. You certainly, I think this might be your 30th or maybe more. I don't know, you could, give me the number, but does it ever change for you when you on release day? Do you ever have does it ever get old or do you ever not get the butterflies when you've got a new book coming out?
Oh, not at all. No. Yeah, this is technically this is 33 but I'm always quick to point out that a lot of that is cheating because I've done 7 co-authored novels. A lot of the books have been very, very short. And then there's a few in there that were right for hires that don't even have my name on them, but I'll still take credit for them. I still did the work. But yeah, no, it never gets any easier. It never gets any less nerve-wracking. And I think for smaller press authors like myself, I mean, Level Best has been a great publisher. They're very supportive. They're still a smaller press, so it's really is on my shoulders to try to get the book out there in front of people and do the promo and set up appearances like this. So it becomes something where you're not just sitting back and hoping for the best. You really are being out front, taking the promotion in your own hands and trying to run with it and do as much as you can. So it's both nerve wracking and it's a ton of work. So, and we all know it's like you get a lot of nice attention on release day and people are very kind and they'll post a picture and they'll say congratulations. And then the very next day, there's 10 other books that people are saying congratulations, happy release day. And it's real easy to have a big splash for one day, but I think any author knows that it's really you have to treat it like a marathon more than a sprint.
Right. Well, you have been pretty open on social media about how tough it is for writers in this day and age.
Mhm.
And believe me, I cannot agree more. How do you see the market right now for crime fiction? Is it a good market? Is it you know, I mean, I've just got done saying it's a tough market, but how do you see it?
Well, I think it's in a good place. I think there's a lot of people who are I think the stigma of crime and mystery as being slightly lesser than, I think has largely faded away. I think people, you know, the idea of something being very popular, being very mass market and being just a crime novel or just a mystery or whatever, people have realized that that's nonsense. So there's still probably some holdouts in the intelligentsia or the literati who look down their nose at crime and mystery fiction, but sales numbers would tell you, readers, this is what they want, and so in that sense. But there's only so much space on a shelf. There's only so much time in the year to read, and when you have a lot of great legacy series, you have whether it's Jack Reacher or long running series, great writers like Val McDermott or Megan Abbott, the people who are very consistent, releasing books regularly, oftentimes in a favorite series where people are really invested. Well,
Mhm.
okay, if you read a dozen books a year and that dozen, 10 of that dozen is filled with an ongoing series or a writer that you really love that is an instant buy for you, well, the window of exposing to new writers gets narrower and narrower. That's always the struggle. But look, that's also always been there.
Right.
One thing that is concerning to me a little bit is, hardcovers now have crept up to the $30 mark, and that gives anybody pause to you got to really be sure it's something that you like. You're much less likely to take a chance on a $30 hardcover than you were, walking up to a spinner rack in the 50s and dropping a quarter for something.
Right.
So I don't want to see books go the way that I feel like live theater has gone, where what used to be the entertainment for the masses is now an entertainment for elite and rich people. I am a big fan of books being as accessible as they possibly can be. So, I would never mind somebody getting my book from a library. You don't have to own your own copy and keep it on your shelf. If you call your local library and ask them to stock it and then they get it and you read it and then it's there for somebody else to read, that's great. As long as people are reading and getting exposed to new authors that way, that's fantastic. So I think a lot of the struggles that we all face are just perennial problems that have always been there and are never going to go away. And you have to just sort of accept that as you take up a pen and decide you want to do this, because there's no sense complaining because we chose to do this, right? It's our
Right.
own damn fault.
Right. Right. Well, I want to go back to something, look, you said about, people looking maybe at this genre as a little bit of a less than. And yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying because I do think that was the thing for a long time. And of course, the Walter Mosleys and and then the Gone Girls and those things have pretty much changed all that. But there's a tagline you use on your website that I love. Uh, Pulp fiction for the 21st century. Now,
Mhm.
pulp fiction is a term that the movie notwithstanding, the actual term Pulp Fiction, a lot of people would have maybe seen that for a long time as a negative. But I love the fact that, you've embraced that and said, no, I do. This is Pulp Fiction, but it's Pulp Fiction in this way. So maybe give us a little bit of a inside look at what you mean by that and just your perspective on it.
Well, I do think it's an apt description, I think, for what I do. I mean, my books are action driven. They tend to be on the shorter side. My day job, I'm a television and film editor. So my whole brain is wired to cut to the chase. So I don't have the 150,000 word manuscripts in me. I could never do that because my own inner editor would keep trimming and trimming and trimming. So my books tend to be on a little bit shorter side, but at the same time, they often get described as being cinematic, propulsive, all those adjectives that I really like and I take as a deep compliment. So that I feel like I have in common with a lot of that sort of let's call the golden age, maybe the 1950s of the pulp paperback, the action story that is quick and punchy and violent and all of those things. I don't see that as a bad thing. I think it's and I think that is where the notion of these books being lesser than probably began. And look, I'm not going to go to the mat saying Mickey Spillane is something that everyone needs to read and study. I mean, it's like you go into those old books, and I read a lot of vintage books, and they're misogynist, they're often racist, and they have all these problems.
Yeah, a lot of
Granted,
ifs.
yes. So trying to update that into the 21st century, take the good stuff from that, make it more modern, more contemporary for a modern day audience, and have the books have some fun.
Yeah.
I think a crime story without a sense of humor is a missed opportunity. I think, excuse me, you want to entertain first. That is why someone is picking up a book. They want to be entertained. They want to
Mhm.
be transported someplace, a different time, a different place, a different world that they live in. And I think that's why I write. I'm not a criminal, don't have no plans to be, never killed anybody. It's not my world. So I transport myself into that world as an escape, which I think is what good fiction always does.
And really honestly, it's clearly what people want. I mean, look, the world feels like a dumpster fire most of the day.
Right.
I'm also an editor, but I'm the managing editor, excuse me, the editor in chief. I keep getting my title wrong these days
Oh,
because I used to be the managing editor of a different publication. Now I'm the editor in chief of the one I'm at. But we cover the California State Capitol. So and of course, whether you're in politics or not, if you're paying any attention, the world feels like a damn dumpster fire most of the time these days. I mean, so yeah, the last thing in the world I want to do most of the time is watch the news. I don't want to be embroiled in things that feel so uncertain to me
right.
because I have to be in depth with it all the time. I pick up a book. I don't care how violent or whatever else is going on in the book. To me, I know at the end how it's probably going to go, right? It's an escape hatch, right? And in our books, the good guys generally win, the bad guys generally lose, though I guess sometimes it changes. But, for the most part, you can, you can always take solace no matter what in knowing it's made up.
Right.
Right? No, nobody's actually going to lose any rights or, or, democracy is not going to die in this book for real, right? Now, reality may be different, but, anyway,
Well, and that's always the thing that it confuses me when someone gets up in arms about the content of a book. Is like, okay, it might not be your thing,
right.
so close the cover, put it down, don't read
Put
it.
it down. There's cozies out the wazoo in this day and age. You can go get one. No one dies, no one swears, and nobody gets naked, and it's just beautiful for you. If all those things offend you, just go ahead and there's a lot of great ones, a
Yeah.
lot of great ones out there. Go check them out. Well, I was going to ask you about the TV thing, which you've already answered, but I have read a lot of great books lately from former TV writers. From folks who've worked on really well-known TV shows, long-running TV shows. And I do find their work to be, and it's very similar to yours, very fast-paced,
Mhm.
get right into it. But the thing that I guess the point I'm driving toward here is that one of the things in that style I see are even things like shorter chapters.
Yeah.
And my agent and I have gone back and forth on this, right? Where she actually had me go and lengthen some chapters out before we went through the submission process or started the submission process. And that was a little hard for me because I had gotten so used to reading shorter, faster, pace, 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 pace. So
Yeah.
I, yeah, I struggle with not doing it that way now because I like to read that. Is that a conscious thing for you when you write? When do you think about things like that? Like, okay, I don't want, I need these chapters to be at about a certain length and keep that. I know everyone thinks about pacing, but do you think of pacing in terms like that? I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
I think it's more instinctual than a conscious thing. I'm not word counting or page counting as I go, but I do think it's just in my storytelling nature to get in and get out. There's sort of a principle of film editing is the idea of coming into a scene as late as possible and getting out as early as possible. If you come into a scene already in motion and get out at a moment that leads you then to the next thing, and it's a very basic kind of storytelling technique that when you are steeped in it and when you do it over and over, it just becomes second nature. Uh, and then I think by contrast, when you see it done the opposite way, it does start to feel a little laggy, and it's like you watch certain films from the 30s and 40s, and someone will exit a room, they'll go all the way out and close the door, and then and they'll cut to a street, and the car will drive up, and they'll get out, and he'll shut the door, and he'll walk up the path and knock on the door. And I think in more modern, visual storytelling, as soon as someone turns for the door, you can cut away. We know where they're going.
Hmm.
And you can, or you can just cut right from like, yeah, we got to go interview that suspect. You can hard cut right to there to a hand knocking on a door. You haven't lost any information. The audience can still follow you. So I think in writing, I follow that sort of same principle where I trust the reader to be up on what's going on. I think readers are smarter than they're often given credit for. And I find that if you end a chapter with a question and you didn't answer everything in what you just explained, then that's what makes you turn the page because you want the answer. So I wish I could say that it was something that I plot out in my outlines or is a very calculated thing that I know exactly what's going to get you and hook you in. But I do think that after you do it enough, it just becomes the way I like stories to unfold.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And uh, thinking about um, the intentionality or the just, how we do things. I find the same thing. I like things to move along kind of quickly. That said, I notice in a positive way. I mentioned maybe I mentioned Walter Mosley earlier. If I didn't, I'll mention him now.
Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed in his writing, yeah, especially in the Easy Rollins series, which I really, really loved. I've read every single one of those, along with probably every other thing the man's ever written. But he always has these very vivid descriptions of people. And of course, so many of his characters are black. So, and there's there's no monolith on skin color and black color, and black skin types. So he always has these great descriptions of, somebody having coffee and cream colored skin or, things like that. But it's always precise and to the point, or he'll describe what they're wearing, but it's always really precise. It's only a sentence, maybe a sentence or two. And I think so many writers, me included, I've done this too. You want to describe the scene, you want to get the setting, but at some point, the reader just doesn't give a rat's anymore, right? You
Yeah.
really have to just what it only matters if it matters,
Right.
kind of a thing. And so it, it sounds like for you that was natural. Me, I had to learn it a little bit, right? Like stop describing every nickel and dime here. But I certainly see it in your writing. You definitely you write like someone who has written for TV and clearly edited now for TV. So that's it's very apparent in your writing. Um, we talked earlier about maybe the small press thing. One of the things that I think a lot of writers have benefited from in recent years, of course, is there used to be this big stigma around self-publication, and now there's not, and that's great. On the plus side, a lot of writers have got into the game and been able to sustain
Yeah.
themselves in a way that maybe they really couldn't have before because no one wanted to read your self-published book, my friend. Well, now there's a lot of good self-published books out there, and
Yeah.
there's good reason because the industry is a bear right now. It's been winnowed down to, it used to be the big 25. Now I think it's the big five.
Right.
Um, that said, the flip side to that is the competition
Mhm.
now for small press authors and mid-list authors and everybody not named Stephen King or Gillian Flynn is ridiculous. Do you think it's a net positive or a net negative that self-publication has become such an accepted thing, and especially in crime fiction and noir fiction? Because that seems to be where we've seen and maybe science fiction too, but I don't talk about science fiction. So where we've seen this huge influx of people coming into the game, do you think it's helped or hurt more?
Um, Look, at the risk of alienating anyone, or it's not a criticism to say that there are too many books out there. And part of that might be self-serving, just because the more books out there, the harder it is to get your book to rise to the top of the pile. So I think, like you say, it's a great resource for a lot of books that you read and you're like, well, this was deserving and as good as anything that I've read published by a major publication, but for whatever that it didn't have that they want on their spring slate of books, it didn't fit their bill. Totally fine. But I do think I, ever since the beginning of self-publishing, the risk is always that books that aren't ready to go to market, writers that maybe aren't ready to get out there, can muddy the waters.
Hmm.
Uh, but who am I to pick and choose which ones are worthy and not worthy. I think that's the great democratization of self-publishing, is that you have a chance to let the marketplace decide and let readers find what they're going to find. And I've seen there's a huge self-publishing market in romance and like erotic romance, like like very, I guess, the 50 Shades of Grey sort of
Right.
influence of that. And even like if you go to what's listed as crime fiction or thrillers, a lot of what's in, the top 50 on Amazon at any given time are self-published books with either, a shirtless man on the cover or woman in lingerie, and they're telling you right up front, this is what it is, and people make a pretty good living at that. So
Mhm.
I'm never going to be the one to say you shouldn't do it and stop doing it. And you know, there are traditional ways that you can just wait and wait and wait for your entire life and never break through. So yeah, why not get the work out there? And if it break, and like a lot of criticism got thrown at something like 50 Shades of Grey, or a lot of those authors in the early days of self-publishing who did break through and ended up selling literally millions of copies. I'll never be one to criticize that at all, because if that many readers are connecting with something and they feel that passionate about it, then there's something of value there for those readers. It might not be my taste, but my taste can run pretty narrow. And you know, congratulations to you if you manage to break through. And it's only good for readers if all of a sudden now there's more stuff that they can find, that they read, that they enjoy. And if it only costs them 99 cents on their Kindle,
Right.
then great.
Well, and the one thing I guess I would say to you with that too, look, if a writer is willing to spend the money on a good editor, spend
Right.
a developmental edit and a copy edit and a good book cover and do all the work to make it discoverable, because none of that's cheap,
No.
right? And whether you're at an indie press or a small press, or you're, you know, starting your own imprint basically to market your own books, whatever the level is, as long as you're willing to do the work to make it the best possible thing out there, and then, like I say, let the market decide. That's actually, I have respect for it because it's hard. I mean, God, marketing, even writing books is hard, folks. So try marketing a book, for
Oh,
crying out loud.
it's 10 times harder than the actual book writing. And look, I'll be the first one to stand on my soapbox and talk about, uh, you know, probably 100 of what would be on the list of great American novels are books that I don't care for. And
Right.
there's stuff that people talk about for 100 years now that I'll pick up and read, and I'll be like, really? This one? I
Right.
I wasn't entertained. I didn't think the writing was that great, but they're connecting with somebody somewhere.
Right.
So yeah, have at it.
Yeah. We've all had to read some of those books in high school too, so we understand.
Right. And
Uh,
I'm like watching my daughters go through high school now and come up against, these classics and the things that you know that they're going to encounter, and that everyone should know just in a cultural setting. If someone wants to reference what the Scarlet Letter is, you should know what they're talking about.
yeah.
But my 16-year-old in the 2020s didn't take a whole lot away from that story.
Right.
Maybe it's time to update those reading lists a little bit.
A little bit. Well, I think it was Twain. I could be wrong here. Don't anyone send me nasty grams. But I think it was Twain that said, a classic is a book that people have on their shelf, but they've never read.
Right.
I'd rather they read the dang book. That's why I love genre fiction, right? And I
Yeah.
read the hell out of it. I probably read more than the average bear, and I love it, right? It's because that's my thing. But let's let me ask you about, well, no, I'll ask you in a short way. in a word or two, describe your first drafts. When you get done with a draft, what word, just your first one, what word or two applies generally to your first drafts?
You're triggering me here, Rich, because I have issues with the accepted idea of a first draft in the writing world. I'll try not to rant too long here. In a word, my first drafts, clean. This notion that I think too many writers stand proudly on for some reason of, oh, your first draft should be a pile of crap. It should be terrible. It's the rewrite, your first revision. That's where you find your story. I reject this so adamantly. And it comes from a place of I don't like revisions. I don't like rewriting. Like why would I want to do it all again? I just did it.
Right.
So I work very hard to make my first drafts as close as I possibly can to a finished book. And I do not understand why anyone would do anything else. So the idea that up and coming writers, new writers, people who are just learning are being fed this line that it not and I guess like everyone should have permission for a first draft to be bad. Yes, 100%. The idea I think that is being touted too much is that it should be bad. And I think for a first novel, like your first draft of your first novel turns out and it's not great. Totally fine. You got to the end, you finished the process. Now you're going to learn through revision. But every time you do it, every revision you go through, every book you complete, every short story, every time you start at the beginning and get to the end should make the next time you do it a little bit more efficient and a little bit tighter and a little bit closer to a final product. So I think that the thing that's missing in this equation, especially for young writers, is that idea of yes, it can be bad because you can't revise a blank page, but you can revise a manuscript.
Mhm.
But the idea that that's the way to do it is just to vomit out this first draft where you haven't found the story yet. Well, that to me is terrible, terrible writing advice. So I want every new writer to have the permission and the bravery to write a terrible draft, but for every subsequent first draft of every book they write after that to get a little bit better, a little bit tighter, a little bit more polished, so that when you're handing it off to a beta reader or a developmental editor or whatever that is, the amount of red pen that it comes back with should be a little less every single time.
I like that.
Does that make me sound like
No, no, no.
an asshole?
I'm actually on board with you on that.
Okay.
Um, and I break every rule though. Oh, you're not supposed to edit while you go. I do it all the time, and maybe it's because I'm a reporter, right? And I've been as a reporter. I mean, I find myself editing drafts as I go all the time because facts change, or not. Facts don't change. Our awareness of things change, or you get an interviewer that you didn't have before, and that you need to make sure it all fits right, and so I don't work where I just vomit it out and then go edit. I mean, I always tell people you can't edit what you haven't written, so you have to write it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of with you on this. I've had people tell me they call it writing out the crap. Okay, I'm with you. I understand that, but I would rather I'm kind of with you. I'd rather try to not spend a lot of time on that. I'd rather rework it in my head and write the sentence better or write the story better the first time. I'm with you. I don't have that much time to spend, quite honestly. I mean, it's because we have day jobs, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have time. I've got to do it. I got to get right to the damn point. So you
Well,
never
and,
know by
and
hearing me talk, but I really do try to get to the point.
just from a process point of view, like I would much rather know my story and have the story be solid in that first draft so that when you are in revisions, I see revisions and rewriting as a place that's where you craft the sentences. That's where you work on word choice. That's when you work on clarity. That's not for me, that's not where I'm finding the plot. That's not where I'm figuring out who done it or like I'm not figuring out any major plot points at that point because my story is set because I I think you have and I hate saying you have to do anything. Nobody has to do anything. You do it how you do it. But for me, I like intention in what I'm writing. And I think this also speaks to what we were talking about earlier of having tighter scenes, shorter chat, a story that moves along because if you know where it's going, you know what you don't need. Like you almost you know as much about what you don't need as what you do need.
Right, right.
So and not not that's I'm an outliner, but I'm a very very skeletal outliner.
Yeah, me too.
My outlines are very flexible. Excuse me. Things can and should be allowed to change as you go. That's just part of the creative process. Yes. So don't be rigid about it. But if you're just typing till you get to 100,000 words, and then you have to go back and sift through all those words to find a story hidden within, I mean, good luck for you. I couldn't do it.
Well, and I think sometimes that happens because, that some people like to plot everything out. Some people like to go seat of the pants. We've had that discussion a million times as,
Yeah.
but I think that's one of the dangers of not outlining or not at least having, I'm with you, I do a very skeletal outline, but for me, that just keeps me on track. I know what the plot twists are and where those need to happen and all. So I don't write 15,000 words that are now useless because I've completely missed my plot twist or my point, or I used a bad one or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Me, I'd rather stop what I'm doing and go take my dogs on a long walk somewhere where I can be left alone to think. And then I come back and what I write's actually a lot better because I worked out all the nonsense in my head as
Right.
opposed to working it out on the page and then having to go do the long walk and come back and redo it all. Actually, it really is a time thing for me. I don't have that much time. So
Yeah, absolutely.
um, so last serious question here. What do you ever have um moments where you think I've had enough of all this? And I'm so tired of struggling to I have to go do these things and all the marketing stuff and I gotta blah 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 and then then I see my sales numbers are not what I want because they never could ever be what you want, right? But
Right.
on and on. You ever have those moments? And if you do, because clearly you get past it if you've had them. How do you get past them when you have that thing where you think, man, I could just go fishing and not be spending more time on this, right?
Yes, I absolutely have those moments, but I think the minute I stop having ideas and the minute I stop having characters pop in the back of my head who start talking to you a little bit and start developing a story that won't go away until I write it. I think until I hit that moment, I'll I'll keep writing. And I feel like I would be the kind of person who would keep writing even if I never published anything again. I mean, I think just to get it out of my head, just to satisfy myself, just to write the book that I think, oh, that's a pretty good idea. I would want to read that book. Well, no one else is going to write it. It's up to me to write it. So if I want to read this book that just popped into my head, now it's up to me to write it. Even if I'm an audience of one, I'll keep doing it. Like you say, the business side of it, yeah, you want to throw in the towel weekly. It's infuriating.
Oh God, yeah.
But but again, like we chose this. There's no sense uh, complaining about it.
Right, right, right.
This is what
Absolutely.
for some reason we wanted. And I think that it is that thing of any creative pursuit, is it writing, is it music, is it painting? You're gonna do it anyway.
Right, right. You
Figuring out a
know,
way to monetize it is the eternal question. But if you're
absolutely.
driven to do it, if that is your chosen creative outlet, and I love that we don't have to pick one. I've played music in my life. I've written things. I've made films. I have painted pictures. You can do all these things. That's like that's part of the beauty of being a human is that you have these creative outlets. And if I can entertain somebody else, even a small readership that I have, well, then that's just bonus.
All gravy for me.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to end on a fun question. As always, I mean for it to be a fun question. Hope it is.
Mhm.
Um, I'm gonna be my omnipotent self here and say that I can put you together with one of the following three people. You can talk writing, or art, have dinner, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Have a drink. That would be your choice. But tell me which one of these people you would choose and why. The options I shall give you today are the great filmmaker Sam Peckinpah, the great crime fiction novelist Jim Thompson, and the Motor City madman Ted Nugent. I can put you together with one of those three people. Who would you
Uh,
want to sit down and have a chat with?
Definitely not Ted Nugent.
Good,
Uh,
a good
we we
answer.
we would not align politically on that. So hard pass on that. Uh, Interesting because the other two guys, I would love to sit down and talk with both of them. They both frighten me a little. I think both have exhibited volatile tendencies that you kind of would never know what you're gonna get. I think I would probably choose Jim Thompson in the end. I think he's he's such a unique figure in the crime fiction community. His novels are so individual in his voice.
hmm
And another guy who's so prolific. This whole run right here, these are the entire Jim Thompson collection. I know
Oh
you
wow.
probably can't read it, but that's when Mulholland re-released everything. It's whatever 25, 27 novels. Um, so I've read his stuff. I'm familiar with it, and it's a great example of someone who can go as dark as a moonless midnight, but still get you to be compelled and care about the characters,
hmm
even though they're often despicable, terrible, terrible people.
Yeah.
Uh,
He
I've
has a he does have a very unique voice.
Yeah,
Very clear, very precise in some ways, but yeah, he's and to me, I felt like he was ahead of his time
yeah,
in a lot of ways because he brought almost not literary. That's not the right term because that sounds flowery, but there was because there's more of a sparseness to his style than that, um man, dude could turn a phrase a lot like Elmore Leonard. Those are just such unique characters. I see so many people get compared to Elmore Leonard now, and sometimes it's very legit. I never see anybody compared to Jim Thompson, and I think it's because Jim Thompson is one of the most unique crime writers that's ever lived.
but that was one of the most uh, generous compliments I ever got. And the thing that I still use in a lot of my bios was an article in Lit Reactor once called me the 21st century's answer to Jim Thompson. And I said, I will take it.
Yeah, that is quite the compliment. I very much agree with you on that one. I would take that one too.
Yeah,
No
much
one's ever going to say it about me, but
much less incest in my books, though. Let me just say that his weird obsession with incest is a little creepy, but
a little much. I agree. I'm with you on that. Well,
like, you get like the third or fourth, you're like, really again? Okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, Eric, as always, great conversation. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you coming by to talk about the new book, which I will remind everybody is called The Last Few Miles of Road. If you haven't seen it yet, go seek it out. If you're watching on YouTube, it was just on the screen. Go check it out. Uh, Big thanks. If you haven't seen any of Eric's other books too, check them all out. He's a fabulous writer. And again, if you like fast-paced, um, thrilling, interesting, all the good adjectives and words I could say. It's all of those. Eric's a real good writer, and I think you'd really enjoy his work. So go check him out if you haven't done so already. I will remind you, please, if you haven't hit subscribe, do that. If you can leave me a review, that'd be great. That does help other people find the show. It really is true. It's an algorithmic thing. It actually does work.
Yeah.
And last thing I'm going to leave you with, it's the same thing I always leave you with. Tomorrow is not promised to anybody. Please, whatever your passion is, whatever you believe in, make today count. For my guest, Eric Beetner, for myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. I will see you next time.